Welcome everybody. Welcome to our first virtual tasting. We're excited about this. This is I think we could call this almost Vino Venue and Friends virtual tastings. I'm Rob Van Leer. I'm the beverage director and partner here at Vino Venue. We're delighted to be here. Before we talk about tonight's tasting, just wanted to kind of speak a little bit about our present situation. Just thinking back in our history, Vino Venue was founded in 2003 as Atlanta Wine School. We expanded and rebranded in 2012 to Vino Venue. So we've been here for, let's call it 17 years. This is not the first storm we weathered. We've had some interesting historical landmarks in our past that have been some real challenges. We've met them all. So this is nothing new to us, just a different brand. A number of good news items are happening today, actually. Today we were funded in the second round of the PPP program. We missed the first one and we got the second one. So the money's been deposited. So it's just very positive. Yay. Just thinking about how blessed we are with a strong group of employees we have, and also blessed with our customers. Here we have people who are showing up. They're buying wine. They're buying food. They're demanding their friends buy wine and food. They're buying gift cards in large denominations. They're leaving generous gratuities for our staff. You guys, your customers are invaluable. Thank you so much. I've always thanked people, but now more than ever, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please keep doing what you do. We appreciate it. Our small business appreciates you guys. And in terms of our business model, it's been changing, but this is not all bad. Some of it's cool, like these virtual tastings. This is something we've been kind of banding around for a while. Now we've been kind of shoved into it, and like, why didn't we do this earlier? And to get a chance to meet with some luminaries from the world of wine is something we would have gotten around to, but it's been jump-started, and we want to keep doing this. This is not just a temporary thing. So to be able to do this, to connect people like Kerith and the all is just invaluable to us. Mm-hmm. So with the virtual tastings are going to be family and friends, people that we know, people we've been to their wineries, they've been to Vino Venue. Some of our regular customers will recognize some of these people. That's important. It's small businesses helping small businesses, and we really, really appreciate that. Just going forward with the time zones, what looks like our plan is, if people are in the Western Hemisphere, they'll be Fridays at 7 o'clock. If they're in Europe, probably Saturdays at 3 o'clock Atlanta time, just because to ask a European to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock is just, that's not nice to our friends and family. A couple housekeeping notes. I want to make sure you guys are muted. And I think to go to the speaker view in the upper right-hand corner will help things. Let's talk about Kerith for a minute. Kerith Overstreet definitely fits the definition of friend of Vino Venue. We've known her for a few years. We've seen her in California. She's been here. She's been to Vino Venue personally. We love her wines, and we love her energy. We keep talking about small business, which we are, but Kerith is the ultimate small business. She's a one-woman show. And that's amazing. She's a wife, a mom, and a one-woman show. Just the energy level is crazy. An interesting thing about Kerith is thinking about in this day and age with emails and texts, Kerith still sends thank you notes, handwritten, very thoughtful thank you notes, and it's amazing. And she sends me olive oil, biscotti, cutting boards, all sorts of stuff. Every time I turn around, Kerith sends me something else. And talking to other people in the Atlanta wine community, I'm not alone. I'm not the only recipient of her largesse. And it's an amazing thing she does. In terms of a story about Kerith, I think the last time I saw you was a couple of years ago at the High Museum trade tasting, High Museum fundraiser. It's a big deal for one of our premier arts organizations in Atlanta. And I was a volunteer sommelier. She was there volunteering her time hosting at a table. Most of her people didn't show up. So after she finished her dinner, she was not a lot for her to do. So it was a time of evening where the somms had done their hard work. And now, frankly, we were back in the somm tent drinking, planned to take Uber. So it wasn't professional tasting, it's just drinking. I said, come on, Kerith, come back in the somm tent with us. And to sit there for a half hour with a winemaker like Kerith and trade observations about all these wines was amazing, where she had her opinions on what the wines were about, the winemaking decisions, how ripe the fruit was. It was neat to hear her perspective. And a comment she made to me at the end was she drinks a lot of Sonoma wines, which are wonderful, but she said she needs to drink more out of her zip code so as to expose herself to winemakers and wine techniques from around the world. So as I pass it over to Kerith, a question I have for you to chew on, Kerith, is Are you drinking more out of your zip code? And how has that affected your strategy going forward? Kerith, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, you guys. So I'm here in Sonoma in the country, and I don't have a great internet connection for some reason tonight. So I'm hopeful you can hear me. If at any time the internet connection dies or slows down, just please bear with me. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for sharing your evening with me. Thank you to Rob and the staff of Vino Venue for inviting me here. And of course, we want to say happy anniversary to Lizette, who is virtually here with us celebrating her anniversary. So thank you, Lizette, and happy anniversary. All right, so if you haven't yet poured yourself a glass of wine, please go ahead and do so. We'll wait for you. So tonight's aim is to teach a little bit and to entertain a lot. So I'm going to be throwing a lot of pictures and I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you. I will answer all of your questions at the end, I promise. Please try to submit them via the chat box. And I will prompt you guys with questions as we go if I can get the internet to behave so people and unmute. Engaging quite as much as we go, it's only because my internet connection is being a little bit persnickety. All right, so I'm lucky to be the very first person doing a virtual tasting for Vino Venue. So with that, I sort of thought we would start at the very beginning. So I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. So when I was a little girl, my dad said to me, "You can be whatever you want after medical school." And I held up my end of the deal. So after residency and after 2 fellowships, I passed my boards and I thought, you know, I think I'd rather be a winemaker. So I went back to UC Davis and I took the winemaking courses. In my very first year, I made 25 cases of wine. That was it, a single barrel. And now I'm lucky enough to have a small estate vineyard of my own. I make about 1,200 cases a year. I cover a lot of different varietals, but my passion is really for Pinot Noir, although I make Chardonnay and I make Rosé of Pinot Noir. I make Zinfandel. I've made a late harvest Sauvignon Blanc. And I love what I get to do. So on this slide here, you see 2 pictures of me back when I was a pathologist sitting at the microscope, and my passion for microbiology has not changed. And there we go. So here you have a picture of me on the right side, staining frozen sections in the pathology lab. And then on the other side, I'm doing a blending trial. So when they say blondes have more fun, they were clearly not taking a career in pathology into consideration. So having a strong background in science is extremely helpful for what I do. Here you can see a really detailed cross-section of a grape. It's from a Hallmark article by Dr. Coombs. And on the other side, you happen to see a cross-section of a lung. So in the grape, you have the xylem and the phloem. In the lung, you have blood vessels and you have lymphatic spaces. The jump from pathology to enology is not as big as you'd think. So I started Bruliam over, my slide went forward. I started Bruliam over 12 years ago, as I said, with 1 barrel of wine, 25 cases. And you can imagine if you go from a well-paying job at a hospital to making 25 cases of wine, you really do rely a lot on family support. And for that reason, I've named the winery after my kids, Bruno, Lily, and Amelia. And of course, Bruliam sounds like cadmium or polonium, so it's a riff on the periodic table of elements. And if you're holding a bottle of Sobranus in front of you, as I hope you are, you can look at the label and you'll see that the graphic is a riff on the periodic table of elements. So if you're at home drinking with me now, I'm going to remind you to pick up your glass of rosé or to pick up your glass of Pinot Noir and give it a swirl and give it a sip. And if you happen to be sitting with someone who's drinking craft beer, they're allowed to be an active listener too. So I encourage everybody to have a sip. All right, so Bruliam Wines really is a small family operation. I love when my kids jump in and help during harvest. As a mom and as a winemaker, it's a joy to see them helping me. That said, full disclosure, Amelia will only come and help me do Sunday morning punch downs if I ply her with donuts. So we'll go to the local donut place, Krispy Kreme, and we'll get donuts for all the interns, and she'll do 1 punch down and she'll eat 3 donuts. So because I get to be the first person to do a virtual tasting at Vino Venue, let's start at the beginning. I bet this schematic is really, really familiar to most of you out there. I know everybody out there already loves wine. So on one hand, this cartoon reminds us that making wine is pretty easy. You start with grapes, you end up with wine. In fact, it's so easy that if you go back to Genesis in the Bible, after the flood, the first thing that Noah did was plant a vineyard. And unlike my vineyard management company here in Sonoma, as soon as he stuck those canes into the ground, he miraculously had a harvest. He then proceeded to harvest those grapes, make wine, and get naked in his tent. I will confide to you that harvest at Bruliam is not nearly as exciting as that. So how do we make wine? Step number 1, you start with grapes. That's the easy part. So again, I'll encourage you at this point to pick up your glass again and to give it a swirl and think about this miraculous transformation that happens from grape to glass, and the way what you have in your glass is the cumulative effect of multiple thousands and thousands of tiny little decisions that the winemaker makes along the way. Step number 2, fermentation with yeast. So in this slide, you see 2 pictures. On the right side, you can see me inoculating Chardonnay barrels. I'm using a little plastic pitcher. I'm pouring a slurry of yeast into each of the barrels. On the other side, you can see the super duper high that I inoculate my big tanks. So you can see me standing over a 5-ton tank, holding a bucket that is not unlike a plastic bucket that you get at Home Depot. So I fill that up with yeast, and sometimes with the big tank, it takes me 5 or 6 times going up the stairs and dumping it over the top because I'm a little bit messy and I don't want to slosh. So there you have it, the plastic bucket technique. Step number 3 in winemaking, cap management. All right, so I'm going to unshare my screen for a minute. Dare I do this? And let's see if I can call on somebody. I guess I'll pick on Adam. Are you able? Let me see, Adam.
Yeah, I'm here. That's me.
Adam, you can unmute yourself. Awesome. Adam, do you want to talk about what cap management is? I put you on the spot. You don't have to.
Yeah, no. So cap management. So once you, you get the yeast in there and the fermentation starts, it sort of bubbles and all those solids basically form a layer on the top that does a couple of things. It protects the wine from oxygen, but it also has all of those phenolics and pigment compounds and things like that. So essentially you can punch it down to loosen that stuff up and kind of get it down into the wine. You can pump it over, you can do nothing. And like you said before, that's one of those like thousands of winemaking decisions that you do. If you want to get a lot of, those pigments out, you really do a lot of punch downs and things like that. If you want it a little softer, you just sort of softly, pump the wine back over the top. But the important thing is that you keep it intact and that you keep it wet. Don't let it dry out. So.
Absolutely, that's right. So cap management is how we deal with the skins and the seeds that float to the top of the tank during fermentation. And I know after I talked about the xylem and the phloem in the plants, it took everybody back to 7th grade biology. And I know everybody remembers that alcoholic fermentation is the breakdown of sugar ending with ethanol, and that reaction is both exothermic, it generates heat, and it generates carbon dioxide. So that carbon dioxide has the effect of pushing all those skins and seeds to the top of the tank. And as Adam rightly said, color and flavor and texture live in the skins and the seeds. So we want to keep those in contact with the juice. So cap management is the way that we take care of that. So here you have a picture of me. Oh, you know what? I see 3 people. Excuse me, there's 3 people in the waiting room.
Okay, click that.
Let me click on that.
Admit all.
Admit all. Okay, sorry guys. Usually Brian is in the background helping me out here. All right, so here you have a picture of cap management. On one side, you can see me standing on top of a big 5-ton tank. I'm standing on a metal gangplank, and you can see me holding a metal stick.
So Kerith, are you there? Can you hear us?
Ah, when did you stop hearing me?
A couple minutes ago, seemed like.
Oh, that was my fault. Okay, so on one side, you can see me straddling a 5-ton tank, holding a metal stick in my hand, and that's manual cap management, punching down the tank. We call that a punch down. And on the other side, you can see me sitting next to a 500-liter wood barrel, next to a woody puncheon. And I really like to ferment in oak when I have the opportunity. So this was a very large barrel, and my dad helped me take the head out of it so that I could ferment some Sobranus in there with some whole cluster. So choosing what you ferment in, the size of your tank, the style of your fermentation vessel, whether it's wood or concrete or stainless steel, all of those things have an impact on the wine. So as you can imagine, if you are doing whole cluster, it makes it really, really hard to break down the fruit. And I'm not quite strong enough to do that. So I have all of my kids swim, and Bruno has a good sense of humor. So every year during harvest, he throws on his Speedo and he jumps into the woody tank to foot tread the Sobranus vineyard whole cluster. And he's super duper game about it. So I always say, child labor is free. The snorkel, that's optional. So once you're done with fermentation, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take that juice and drain it out of the tank. And this is a picture of juice being drained out of the tank. And you can hear the sound of the juice. You can imagine. And once you've drained all the juice out of the tank, which is now wine, baby wine, you're left with the skins and the seeds. And again, I'll point out that winemaking is very glamorous. You can see me here holding a plastic PVC rake, hand raking all of the skins and the seeds out of the tank. And sometimes if there's a lot in there, I'll climb into the tank from the top, wearing my shorts, and shovel it out from below and scoot out the bottom of the tank on my bottom. So once you have those skins and the seeds, the next thing you do is take them to the press. And moving forward. Okay, Brian, why am I not moving forward? moving forward to the press, I love this picture because it shows you that even for somebody like me who is based in evidence-based science, sometimes the art of winemaking comes first. So you can see me here obsessively protecting my press wine with dry ice. So in other words, I'm preventing it theoretically from oxidation using the carbon dioxide from the dry ice. And of course, if you think about it, it's a little bit ridiculous because the press is outside, so everything is surrounded by oxygen. But I love this picture because it demonstrates one of the many, many ways, even for me, that voodoo trumps science. So what do we do with all of that new wine? Well, of course, it goes into barrels for aging, and that process is called élevage. And by the time you have 13 harvests under your belt, you get pretty good with filling barrels. And if you're really good, you can fill barrels and drink your latte at the same time. When the wine is done aging, of course, we take it out of the barrel exactly the same way. We hook it up to a pump, we use inert gas, and we take the wine out of the barrel. And then it's time for bottling. So thank you for being so patient with the internet. At this point, give yourself a pat on the back because you've taken wine from grape to bottle successfully. So pick up your glass, cheers to you guys, and have a drink to congratulate yourselves. Excellent. Well, here's a picture of the winery. So I know some people out there, I know Kelly and Sharon are out there virtually. Hi guys, have had the opportunity, and Adam too, to meet in Sonoma. I make my wine at a cooperative winery called Grand Cru, and we have beautiful tasting rooms, and I hope once leisure travel restrictions are lifted, everyone will consider a visit to the winery and visiting Sonoma. And here we have another couple shots of the tasting room, including a pretty shot of the rosé bottle. And I don't think the video will work here, but we'll give it a go. Oh, my video's not moving. So I will tell you that this was just a video of the patio at the winery. All right, everybody. Now it's time to get serious. So the first wine of the tasting tonight is the Rosé of Pinot Noir. And as you know, there are 3 ways to make rosé. The first way is called whole cluster press. With whole cluster press, we take all of the fruit that we pick in the vineyard and we put it into the press the same way we would manage white wine. And we crush those whole clusters, and the contact between the grapes and the pressed juice gives it a pink hue, which will get darker the longer you keep the juice in the press. And that's called whole cluster press rosé. The second technique is called Saignée. And my rosé of Pinot Noir is a Saignée technique, and it's a byproduct of the Pinot program. So Saignée is derived from the French verb saigner, S-A-I-G-N-E-R, which means to bleed. So essentially, we're bleeding off a small component of the juice from the Pinot Noir tanks, separating it out and fermenting it separately as rosé. So when you make Pinot Noir being the persnickety grape that it is, you're always looking to protect your fruit. So when we destem the fruit, we don't crush it. So we destem to whole berries. They look like little blueberries. And even being as gentle as that, you can imagine when you have 5 tons of fruit in a tank, the weight of the fruit on the top is going to compress the fruit on the bottom a little bit and generate some juice. So as soon as I dump the fruit into the tank for each lot, I hook up the pump and take away a small volume of juice. And that juice becomes the rosé of Pinot Noir. All right. And so here we go. So this slide is in place just to remind you that even with something as simple as rosé, the wine that you have in the glass is the cumulative effect of many, many, many teeny, teeny decisions. And I'm going to come back to seeing everybody for a minute. And I'm going to ask, if anybody has the rosé, if they're able to raise their hand and maybe unmute themselves. Oh, Charles. Charles, I see you raising your hand. Are you able to unmute yourself, Charles?
You can do like a scroll over, blue dots.
Unmute. Okay, Charles.
Very good. Yes.
Go ahead. So would you be willing to share a little bit about what you think about the rosé?
Sure. I think it's very complex for a rosé. It has lots of earth in it, as well as the strawberries and cherries that you normally would associate, both in the nose and in the mouth.
Thank you.
And it's got lots of tannin, actually. Much more than I would expect for even a Pinot, much less a rosé. That's very nice.
Thank you. So the rosé of Pinot Noir is fermented in a tank, and then it's aged in neutral oak. Some of the barrels are even 10 years old, and the rest is fermented in stainless steel. It's meant to be a fun, easy drinking kind of summer wine. And let's see. I was going to see if anybody else wanted to share anything about the rosé. And I am looking to see if anybody raises their hand. Toggle back and forth, according to Brian. Let's see, does anybody else have the rosé? Who wants to share? I'm going to try to look again. My screen's a little bit slow. I could just pick on someone. That wouldn't be nice, though.
I can.
All right, back to my, and I won't torture anybody. So as I said, even when you're making something like rosé, it is the cumulative effect of multiple small decisions. And what I'm going to show you next is just one of the fermentation curves from the rosé from the 2018 vintage. So because the different lots of Pinot Noir come into the winery at different times, I have the juice at different times. So what you have in your glass, if you're drinking the rosé, is a cuvee of 6 different individual fermentations. And in order to maintain the aromatics on the rosé, I go for a long, slow, cool fermentation. And so you can see this fermentation curve lasted almost 3 weeks from the starting sugar until it was dry. And you can see the sugar dropping with the blue line, and then you can see the temperature with the red line, It may look a little bit alarming on the temperature to see those spikes, but that's actually because the window of the temperature was so small that any little change of 2 or 3 degrees looked like a giant bump. But if you actually look at the high and low temperature, it really only oscillated between 58 and 64 degrees. So I had it in the cold room the entire time, keeping it nice and cool. Of course, the other consideration with rosé is color. People are looking for something that's beautiful and absolutely clear and incredibly aesthetic. So the other thing that I do before I bottle the rosé is I do a color trial. So I start with my base rosé, which is the palest bottle that you see on the left-hand side. And I do trials adding 1%, 2%, 3%, up to percent finished Pinot Noir from a neutral barrel. And it's always fun and interesting to do. Most years I add between 0.75 and 1.5% finished Pinot Noir to the rosé to end up with the color that I think be the most beautiful for what you're going to see in the bottle. All right, everybody. So the rosé is a rosé of Pinot Noir from Sonoma County. And now fasten your seatbelts because we're going to travel 4 hours south to the Santa Lucia Highlands. So I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning when I was stressed out about the internet connection, but I was lucky enough to have Rob with me in the Santa Lucia Highlands for Psalm Camp a few summers ago. So I know that Santa Lucia Highlands is a region near to my heart and near and dear to Rob's heart. The land is beautiful, the views are spectacular, and it's basically a perfect climate for growing Pinot Noir. So hopefully no one will get car sick as we zip south, lickety split. And here we go. We've already arrived. Oh my goodness, look at that. There we go. And we've already arrived. So here we are in the Santa Lucia Highlands. It sits about 4 hours south of Sonoma County. This is near the growing basket of California, that big green thumbprint that you see in the middle of the state. This is John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath Country, Cannery Row, and there's a lot of history in this region. So the Santa Lucia Highlands sits broadly in the umbrella of Monterey County. Aha, and I have a question for you guys. So does anybody know the #1 agricultural crop of Monterey County? Does anyone want to raise their hand? I'm going to see if I can see anybody. Oh, Rob knows. Okay, so Rob, I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to unmute you. Okay, hold on here. I'm going to unmute you, as I said for the 4th time. There we go. Okay, Rob, what is the #1 crop in Monterey County?
Wine is too obvious. I'm going to go with lettuce.
You know what? A lot of people think that. Not only because Mark Pizzoni sends me 8 heads of romaine with every fruit sample, but actually the #1 crop of Monterey County is the strawberry. I didn't know that until I was at Psalm Camp a few years ago because I actually thought it was lettuce too. All right, you guys, back to the shared screen and back to the Santa Lucia Highlands. So as you can see, it's spectacularly beautiful. But if you've never heard of the Santa Lucia Highlands, I forgive you. It's teeny. To give you some perspective, Sonoma County is about 80 miles long and 60 miles wide. The Santa Lucia Highlands, all in, is about 18 miles long and 2 miles wide at its widest. But even though this region is sort of under the radar, I think it's a place you should know about. So here, I pulled up some highlights from some of the different reviewers. I love that Letty Teague at the Wall Street Journal calls the Santa Lucia Highlands our favorite California wine region that nobody knows about. In addition to that, Antonio Galoni did a review of Santa Lucia Highlands Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs. And the conclusion that he came to was when consumers see Santa Lucia Highlands on the label, that's the best indicator of quality for a domestic Chardonnay or a domestic Pinot Noir that you're going to see. And that is because SLH is so small and it's so impeccably farmed. Everybody making wine in the Santa Lucia Highlands is making wine that is really special and full of personality and is farmed with a tremendous amount of detail and fermented with a tremendous amount of heart. So here's another beautiful picture, as you can see, nestled along the mountain range. And here are just some of the facts. As I said, it is broadly part of Monterey County, but the late Nicky Hahn recognized the magnificent growing pattern for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and he was the one who took the initiative to chunk this out as an AVA. And it's been an AVA since 1991. So the climate there is informed by what's happening underneath the Pacific Ocean out in Monterey Bay. And it's something called the Blue Grand Canyon. It's what it sounds like. It's a big underground crater. But really what that does is it pulls the coldest jet of Pacific water into the bay. Along all of California, the single coldest convergence of water is not San Francisco Bay, it's in Monterey Bay. And what that does is it drives a weather pattern just over the mountains. And so what you'll get is exactly what you would imagine for a coastal. You're going to get fog in the morning and wind in the afternoon. And this is a nice little cartoon that talks you through a typical day in the Santa Lucia Highlands. So you wake up and you're wearing jeans and a sweater because even though it's July, it's still really chilly and foggy in the morning. And it can be heavy, heavy fog where it almost feels like it's precipitation, a wet, cold heaviness hanging over the vineyard. And then around maybe 11 o'clock, the sun starts to peek through and everything starts to warm up a little bit. The wildflowers wake up, the herbs that are planted, the chaparral, all of the foliage starts to wake up. And then around 2 o'clock, the wind starts to roar through the valley. And the wind is intense. The wind is so intense that if you are playing bocce ball at Gary Franscione's house, it is a windstorm unless he hoses down the bocce court first. This wind is so intense that it shuts down photosynthesis. Yep. You heard that right. It shuts down photosynthesis. So the grapes stop accumulating sugar. They close up their stomata, the little windows on the leaves, and they stop producing sugar. But the other indicators of maturation continue. So acid will continue to drop. The tannins in the structure will continue to mature, but the sugar slows down. And when we talk about the Santa Lucia Highlands, you'll often hear people talking about the long hang time. And that's what we mean. We mean that it might take longer for the grape to accumulate enough sugar for ripening, but that doesn't matter because all of the other indices of maturation can continue. So one thing that I like is Randy Caprasso at the Somm Journal likes to joke that the grapes in the Santa Lucia Highlands spend more time wearing their sweaters than they do bikinis. Now, I know I'm giving you a ton of information, so please, as we go along, please sip with me, and also please submit your questions into the chat box so that we can reach them all at the end so that I can answer everything for you. So here's another lovely picture. It might be a little out of focus for you guys. It's a little out of focus for me. So what does the wind do? Why is the wind so important? So the wind has three really important jobs. Number one, it's going to dry out that fog. So it mitigates the rot pressure. It mitigates the botrytis pressure. Number two, it keeps the grapes really, really cool. When grapes get hot, instead of sweating, they do something called respire their malic acid, which is just to say that grapes that stay cool maintain their acidity, which gives wine that vibrant lift that makes it super duper duper food friendly and gives it the longevity that you expect in the cellar. Number three, the wind acts to shake up the grapes, causing them to thicken up the skins, which is where you get the color and the flavor. So when you see a Pinot Noir from the Santa Lucia Highlands, you're tending to get more texture and body and color than you might expect for a Pinot Noir that's growing in a cool climate. The other point that I wanted to talk about that makes SLH special is these wines often have a savory character to them as well. My husband Brian calls Pinots from the SLH that earthy, leathery, clovey thing. And it's something that one of the wine reviewers jokes is the terroir. And by that, I think he means that the grapes from SLH seem to contain the essence of all of the native flora that's growing in that part of California, which again includes things like chaparral and wild herbs. So you're going to get this beautiful yin yang of a dark, wild, brambly fruit, as well as savory characters, which are delicious. So I've spent a lot of time telling you that SLH is this tiny, precious little under the radar area. And you may wonder, how exactly did I get hooked up with Santa Lucia Highlands? And for that, we're going to have to time travel back to 2003. So in 2003, I had finished up my fellowship in pathology, actually finished my second fellowship in pathology and passed my boards. And I was pregnant with Bruno, taking time off for maternity leave. And I was reading the newspaper. And back then, the Wall Street Journal wine columnists were a wonderful husband and wife team, John and Dottie. And I was reading the column, and they were talking about Pinot Noir, and they were talking about the Santa Lucia Highlands. And I started reading the newspaper article, and I said to my husband, Brian, hey, this wine looks interesting. Why don't we order a bottle of Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot from this place called Gary's Vineyard? And the wine came in the mail, and I opened it up. And who would think that one bottle of wine would literally alter my career path? And sure enough, it did. And I'm going to read to you a little excerpt from the newspaper article, and I think you'll see why I was immediately smitten. Massive cherry, berry lilac, roasted nose that you can smell across the room. Absolutely chewy, rich nose bursting with fruit. Classy and tight with Bing cherries and blackberries. Fine, seriously expensive. Layered with tobacco and cedar, vanilla and spices. It's almost like a meal with a long finish. Truly classy. I wish I could wear this behind my ears. So as you can imagine, you read something like that, you drink a bottle of wine like that, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm ever going to make Pinot Noir, it's got to be from that vineyard. And sure enough, I was lucky enough to have that come true. So in 2009, I called up Mark Pizzoni, who's the son of one of those Gary's guys that I'd read about in the newspaper. And I said, I've been making wine for 2 years. Do you think you could sell me some of that Gary's fruit? And I had a lot of moxie. I didn't quite understand what an allocated vineyard even meant back then. But Mark was gracious and kind enough to take a chance on me. And he said, you know, we've got this new vineyard. It's called Sobranos. It's next door to Gary's. It's going to have its first crop in 2010. So why don't you bring the kids down and we can meet each other and we can see if we get along. So I load the kids into the minivan and we drive 4 hours. And of course it took longer than 4 hours because the kids are really little and we needed to make some stops. So we get there, and what's the first thing that kids need to do when they arrive? Everyone's nodding in agreement because they know they need to go to the bathroom. So we unload the minivan, the kids go into Gary's house, Bruno goes into the bathroom, and he emerges 5 minutes later with the biggest smile on his face. And he says, Mom, guess what? I pooped so big it just won't flush. And yeah, it wasn't exactly the meeting I'd hoped for, but luckily Mark was extremely patient and he sold fruit to me anyway. So the inaugural vintage was 2010. I've been with that vineyard since the initial crop, and I've grown up with the vineyard, having gone from under a ton of fruit that very first year to as much as 7.5 tons some years. So I'm going to share my screen with you again. And hopefully this slide, aha, there we go. And I just have a little picture of the newspaper article because I save it. And every now and then I pull it out and I just giggle because sometimes you just get very, very lucky. So here I am standing in the Santa Lucia Highlands. I wish I could tell you I were a supermodel, but it's really just those 15-mile-an-hour winds blowing my hair and halting photosynthesis. The wine that's in your glass comes from the Sobranes vineyard. It's named for a guy named Vasquez Sobranes, who was deeded the land in a land grant from the Mexican government that predated the American Revolution. What else about it? It is a proprietary clone. So they call it a suitcase clone. And when you plant a vineyard, there's pants and a shirt. And the shirt is what comes out of the ground. You know, that defines the personality of that grape. And the fruit that I get from this vineyard is the proprietary Pizzoni clone. And rumor has it that Gary Pizzoni went to the Domaine Romane Conti to DRC, and in the dead of the night, he stole the cuttings, packed them into his luggage, wrapped them in his underwear, and brought them back to the United States illegally, and that's what he used to seed the entire vineyard. That is a story that I can neither confirm nor deny at this time. This is a lovely picture of bud break in Sobranes from 2012 with just sort of a list of the characteristics of Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot. And again, if that's what you have in your glass, take the time to swirl your wine and see how it's opened up over time. Because SLH really is a region where the wines are going to unfurl and open up like a flower and change from earthiness to darker fruit and back to some of those herbal qualities again. And with that, thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for being so patient with our country internet connection. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Rob. I'm going to unmute him and we will answer all your questions. So here we go. Rob, I'm in the process of unmuting you.
I think I'm unmuted, I believe.
You are unmuted indeed.
I feel special. Well, what a great presentation, Kerith. That's awesome. That really takes me back. That week we spent in Santa Lucia Highlands is amazing. And I as a youngster, I graduated from Monterey High School, so it was fun to go back there.
Oh, so you know all about it.
That was crazy times, great times too. So everybody, what sort of questions do we have for Kerith?
Did you see anything in the chat box, Brian?
Yeah, there's one, there's a couple actually. So
Okay.
there was a question, just, I think they need a better explanation around, you know, that you're here, you make your wine here, but you're buying the grapes down there. How does that work?
Right, so that's a great question. So even though I'm a Sonoma girl, as I told you, I fell in love with Santa Lucia Highlands. So over the course of harvest, before harvest, leading up to harvest, I should make that very clear. Leading up to harvest, I'll usually drive down there twice, walk through the vineyard with Mark, taste the grapes, walk the rows, and, you know, talk about harvest. Absent that, Mark Pizzoni and I, my vineyard manager, have been working together for a long time. So he knows the style of wine that I'm trying to make and what I'm looking for. And every 3 days, he'll go out to the vineyard for me. He'll cut a whole bunch of clusters. He puts them into a Ziploc bag with ice and sends them up, and I pick them up in Santa Rosa. So every 3 days, I'm tasting. And as I said, Mark farms grapes as well as other vegetable crops. So I will go over to his brother's winery, pick up my wine sample, and there's a Ziploc, a giant Ziploc of grapes, 9 heads of romaine lettuce, 3 of the most enormous beets you've ever seen, and like 2 cucumbers. Next question.
Do you want to explain that we live in Russian River Valley and you know, we have our own vineyard and that's
Sure.
wine?
Sure. So we physically live in the Russian River Valley, which, as you know, is one of the well-known Pinot Noir growing regions in Sonoma County. Our kids go to school here, we live here, and we live where we have our small estate vineyard, the Torrey Hill Vineyard. I make my wine at Grand Cru. It's a cooperative winery. It's located in the town of Windsor, about 10 or 12 minutes from my house. I make different wine from lots of different vineyards, including, as you saw, the rosé from Sonoma County. So I'm always out in different vineyards all over Sonoma County leading up to harvest every day, sampling, tasting, trying to decide when it's time to harvest. And when it's time to harvest, the grapes get picked at those vineyards. They get picked at 2 or 3 in the morning when it's really cold, loaded onto trucks, and then they drive the trucks to the winery, and we process the fruit first thing in the morning.
There's a couple of questions that are asking for your sort of personal tasting notes on the Pinot. What do you smell and taste when you try the 16 Sobranes?
Sure. For me, with the 16 Sobranes, it starts, especially in the aromatics, on the savory side. So more earth, sort of wild herbs. Brian gets a lot of like the earthy, leathery thing. For me, it's a little bit more like Asian 5-spice. And as it sits in the glass and as you swirl it, it opens up tremendously into darker fruit. So for me, rather than telling you it's an Alala berry versus a huckleberry, I just sort of divide things into red fruit, dark fruit. And to me, this is sort of in the darker blackberry category. We have wild blackberries that grow across the street from our vineyard, and it just sort of reminds me of that sort of wild blackberry flavor. And you know, the way blackberries ripen on the vine, you're going to get some that are not quite ripe and some that are super duper duper ripe and super duper sweet. And I love that the Sobranes Pinot gives you a dark fruit quality that is not syrupy thick, but it almost has that edge of like a crunchy berry, and I mean that in a good way. There's still a hint of that tartness back there. The other thing that I always think is exceptional about Sobranes is how lovely it is on the palate. It really does have an incredible broad generosity on the palate. So that's talking about texture and mouthfeel being very smooth in mouth coating. The tannins tend to be really sort of soft suede tannins as opposed to pokey elbow tannins, if that's helpful.
Okay. Paige Hollis, who's right in the middle
Yes,
of the
I see
screen,
Paige.
is now unmuted. She had a couple questions or comments.
Go ahead, Paige.
Oh, no, she's still muted.
Oh, you're muted. Did you unmute her?
She's unmuted.
Okay.
Paige, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Kerith. Thank you for remembering that we were there, but I'll have to say this. We were only there because of our friends Mara and Scott, who are also with us, and they knew about you. They're waving, as you can see, and it was the highlight of our trip in early March. Fortunately, we got there before all of this stuff started, and we had a delightful visit with you. Also wanted to mention that the SLH Pinots have always been one of my favorites. Gotten to know both Gary and Jeff and talked to Mark on the phone, and also met Gary Francione. They are wonderful people, and their grapes and everything are just spectacular. You are right on track with that, and I'm so happy for you for that. What now?
Yeah, and under Paige Hollis, it's Kelly
Oh yeah,
and
it's
Sharon.
Kelly and Sharon. It says Paige
We're
Hollis.
on Paige's.
We're on our daughters.
We're on her machine.
Okay, I cut out there for a minute, but yes, everybody has a Gary story. Am I unmuted?
You are.
Good, okay. Okay, perfect. So everybody has a Gary story, and here's my tagline. It starts with marijuana and it ends with debauchery.
Yep.
Good beginning, great end.
Yeah, here's, you know, that's like one of those, I'll drink to that, right?
Yes, exactly.
Andrew. Andrew wanted to know whether the rosé is a drink now versus hold and cellar.
Yeah, I would say the rosé is a drink now. I think what you guys have is the 2018 vintage. I am one of those people who is always squeezing limes and lemons into my water. I just happen to have a palate that's calibrated to like things that are higher in acidity. So what I love about the 18 rosé is that it has a beautiful, vibrant acidity that carries through that like is mouth-watering. But it also has some of the roundness on the palate that I had in the 2017 vintage. You know, rosé really is made to drink and sell in that vintage. That said, there have been years where we've had a rosé that it was a year or two out of vintage and we've pulled it out of our personal cellar and it's been super yummy. Actually, I recall having one in the winter once with a pork vindaloo that we did in the slow cooker and it was divine.
For whatever it's worth, I'm actually drinking the 16, and it had just lots of vibrancy to it. It was still very, very bright. It was wonderful.
Wow, that's a compliment and a half. Thank you, Charles.
Sure, you bet.
That's awesome.
I got a couple more questions.
Okay.
There was a question about just sort of your long range plans. Looking ahead 2 or 3 years, what vision do you have for your wine production? Anything different than today?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. You know, I always joke that I just want to be a happy winemaker. So for me, I already get to play in the best vineyards. You know, I'm super duper lucky. I'm the smallest girl on the big boy playground. Like if you look at the other people who are buying fruit from the Pizzonis, they're all big time players. So for me, getting to have 4, 5, or 7 tons of fruit off of these ranches for me to play makes me very, very happy. You know, 900 to 1,500 cases feels like a good range for me. That said, maybe when all the kids are off in college and I'm not on minivan carpool duty all the time, I'll make more wine. But I get to make all the things that I'm passionate about, so I don't feel the need to be bigger because I'm so grateful for the fruit that I get every harvest.
I wanted to ask you one thing.
Yeah.
Which is, when you think about your style for the SLH, what do you think your style is?
That's a good question. I do always love to maintain the acidity. I pick the fruit when it tastes delicious. I think personally across all of my wines are more interesting when they have different notes, you know, like an orchestra, high notes, low notes, different instruments at the same time. So for me, I'm always looking for ways to keep both the fruit and the savory notes, because a wine that only tastes like one thing is not going to hold your interest in your palate or your imagination over the course of a meal. So for me, especially with SLH, I really love to court and maintain those savory qualities. And I do that in a number of ways. One of the ways that I do that is by pulling some of the fruit away from the tank and fermenting it whole cluster with all the stems. And that was the picture you saw of Bruno foot treading inside that wooden barrel. And when you ferment on the stems, you're picking up more stem tannins. So that's going to build a little bit of structure. In addition, you're fermenting in oak. And so those tannins from the stems are going to bind with those tannins in the oak, and it starts building mid-palate early. The other thing I do is I choose the oak barrels with a lot of care. So for Santa Lucia Highlands, I lean towards barrels that are more base notes. They don't have as much intrinsic sweetness to them. You put your nose into a new barrel and it's got base notes like coffee and toast and a toasty character, as opposed to barrels that I'm using in the Russian River Valley, which have an inherent sweetness or a sapidity to them. So I choose base note barrels for Santa Lucia Highlands to give it more of that gravitas. You know, I call this a big boy pants Pinot Noir, a brooding Pinot Noir, an intellectual Pinot Noir. So barrel choice, when you harvest, and using whole cluster are three of the ways, and yeast choice are three of the ways that I like to balance the big fruit that you can get with other notes. Good question. Anyone else, feel free to unmute yourself and shout it out.
There's a question on climate change. What impact is climate change having on your wines or your plans?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, we are lucky here in Sonoma County that with the 17 fires and the 19 fires, 80% of Sonoma County was picked before the fires. I'm lucky that I make Pinot Noir, which you guys know is an early ripening varietal. So in both fires, I was totally done with harvest, done with fermentation actually, by the time the fires came. But working with wildfires, I think, is a reality. I took a smoke course and they did an online poll and they asked the winemakers, how many of you have had experience with smoke taint? And the number was over 100% because we've had multiple vintages. And in fact, my very first vintage, '08, was a smoke taint year in Anderson Valley. So my very first year, I had a grim, eye-opening experience with smoke taint. And I think, you know, like I said, Pinot Noir is early ripening. I think it's a little bit trickier if you make Cabernet or Rhone varietals that need to hang out there a little bit longer. I think the push for sustainability in Sonoma County is incredibly positive. Sonoma County is almost 100% sustainably farmed, and the Sobranes vineyard is too. And with sustainability, we think about how do we maintain our vineyards with excellent vineyard health for 100 years to come? How do we manage water? So here at Torrey Hill at our own vineyard, we spent a lot of money pulling out old irrigation and putting in new irrigation drip that was more efficient. And even though we added 1,500 vines, we were using half the amount of water. So, you know, I think climate change is an excellent thought. And yes, it's going to change the way we make wine, the way we approach wine, the parameters under which we harvest. And I think it's a moving target, but real for sure.
And then I guess the last question, and you may have answered this one, but Rob asked you a question right at the get-go, and with all of our technical difficulty, it may have gotten lost in the shuffle. He wanted to know about your transition to drinking more out of your zip code.
So I am proud to report to you, Rob, that last Saturday night, as per our COVID tradition, we order in from one of the local restaurants once a week and we bring in a takeout feast. And last Saturday, we opened up a 2010 Nuit St. George Premier Cru from Chateau Lescure. Woohoo! So yes, we are trying very much to branch out of our zip code, and it's always delicious.
Adam wants to know, can you talk about what plans you have for other varietals? I've had yours in and it's amazing. Any thoughts on anything else?
Yeah, hi Adam. So Brian, who's sitting behind me, I call him the CF No. So in the past, I've asked if I could make a Marsanne Roussanne in a concrete egg. And he said, if you really want to lose money, then that's an awesome idea. So that got canned. I said, do you think we could make a port? He nixed that one. I did make the late harvest Sauvignon Blanc 2 harvests ago. And I may bring that back this harvest or next year. I've thought about doing a still Sauvignon Blanc, but the problem with SB is it gets released at the same time as Rosé. And I love making Rosé, and Rosé is so detail oriented with color and heat and cold stability that I don't know if I want to have another wine that comes out and is released in the summer for the same sort of demographic as Rosé. I got a thumbs up on the Rosé. Another thumbs up on the Rosé. Lots of thumbs up.
There is the last question about your biscotti recipe.
Okay, so yes, the biscotti recipe that I wish I could claim I invented it. I did not. So the recipe comes from Cooking Light. And if you go to Cooking Light, which is now a defunct magazine, but all the recipes are online, and you Google Tuscan almond biscotti, the base recipe will come up. And here are the tricks. Trick number 1, you need to use half white whole wheat flour and half regular all-purpose flour, because that gives the biscotti a little bit more bite. Number 2, they don't talk about covering it with demerara or a turbinado sugar before you put it in the oven, but that's very important, because then when it gets the second bake, you get that good crunchy sugary coating on top. And then I guess the other trick is if you're gonna double the recipe, because they get eaten quickly, you need to add an extra egg.
All right, I think we're.
Is that it? Are we tapped out? Okay, Rob has a few words about what's coming up. So I'll turn it over to Rob.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kerith. This was great. I think we all learned a lot from you. And also thank you for letting me express a little my personality with the wine choices. You left the wines up to me, and I've had all your single vineyard Pinots. We've sold all your single vineyard Pinots, and Sobranos is my favorite. I personally like it because it has a hard-edged, iron-rich minerality to it, a little leather, plus generous fruit. So it's kind of that yin-yang going for me. You're right, you never get bored drinking it. So thank you for letting me express a little my personality with this wine. I hope everybody else enjoyed it too, because I love that wine. So we do have a few more things coming up here at Vino Venue. Yeah, no worries. We have a few more things coming up at Vino Venue. Oh, by the way, this is my wife, Carol. I think a number of you people know her, and I love this lady.
Yay. Okay.
No worries. So we have a few things coming up. First of all, vinovenue.com is a great resource for everybody. You look at the top toolbar, there's a takeout food menu, there's a retail wine menu, and there's a calendar. So in terms of what's going on, without telling you all the classes and events we have coming up, we have a lot of stuff. We have in terms of the tastings we have coming up, we're going to be in Bordeaux next week. Yasmina Asali from Chateaubriand in Cadillac, Bordeaux will be here. And that's going to be Saturday, the 2nd of May at 3 p.m. Horatio Fuentes will be here Friday, the 8th of May at 7 p.m. He's from Vino Venezuela in Maipo Valley, Chile. And then Leo Becconcini will be here on Saturday, the 16th of May, 3 p.m. So again, we're trying to be nice to our European partners and not make them stay up too late. So it's going to be fun. These folks, I think a lot of you people might have already met them, because all of them have been to Vino Venue. We sold their wines, their family-owned vineyards. We love these people. So it's kind of we're all kind of giving ourselves a big warm hug at this moment, which is great, and including you, Kerith. So please check out the website. In terms of takeout food, the business is going well. I mean, we're serving Monday through Saturday, noon to 8 o'clock. We're doing a great weekend special. Next weekend will be jerk chicken. So it'll be medium spicy, and we'll have some cool wines to go with that. So please continue to support the Vino Venue. Continue to support your local businesses. Your small family-owned businesses is the way to go, whether that's your dry cleaner, whether that's your gas station, but whatever you do, please support these people, because they need you in this time. Look forward to seeing everybody else. I will send everyone an email just thanking them and just kind of showing the schedule again. But again, please go to the website and look. One more point before we sign off is our wine club. Our wine club, there's never been a better time to join. It's something where you choose from 14 wines a month. You choose either 4 or 6 wines. If you want to do safe wines, you can do that. If you want to do weird grapes you never heard of, you can do that. You want whites, reds, rosés, dessert wines, sparkling wines, we got it all. There's no contract. We have a number of longtime wine clubbers listening now, and guys, thank you for your support. A couple of reasons to do the wine club now is please support us, but also the economics are working in our favor. There are companies now, large and small, that are like, oh shucks, we need to move some boxes. And so I'm seeing deals. So really, for your money, the cost haven't gone up, but you will be drinking wine that was more expensive than before. So there's never better time to join it. Please shoot me an email, rob@vinovenue.com, rob@vinovenue.com for details. That's as hard sell as I get. Again, Kerith, God bless you. Thanks so much. I think your inaugural tasting was great. I think you really opens people's eyes. And again, thanks for the Sobranos Pinot Noir that made my evening. So God bless you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being there for us. And we love you. Take care. God bless.
Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.